Hello everyone, welcome to your next section. In this one, we're going to do a two-parter talking about how we first bring in a file into data and then take that piece of information, do some manipulation on it, and then write out that data into some other file output. So like an input-output kind of design. This is a very common thing to do in data science because a lot of times you're going to be dealing with like a file that exists somewhere in some server or computer somewhere. So knowing how to really quickly, efficiently, and easily load in a piece of information, do some calculations on it, and spit out some like really raw, quick data or analysis about it, or processing, all of these kind of things is really important. So what you're going to learn in this class is how to read a file into an object in Python. You're going to learn how to then take that file and do some sort of iterative process to it. You're going to learn how to basically take that object and do very quick manipulations. And then with the next class, we'll learn how to take those manipulations and put them somewhere else to write it out into another file. We're also going to look at this thing called the with statement. So it's a nice, efficient way of dealing with line by line addressing data in a file, like a CSV file. So when I say CSV file, what am I meaning specifically? Usually you're probably familiar with what CSV files and spreadsheets look like, but for those of you who don't, a lot of times when you're dealing with data, you have columns of information and they're separated by some sort of special character. Sometimes that character can be a letter or, a punctuation. A lot of times we separate columns using commas. There are many other ways you can separate a file. So when you see a file like in your directory and it's .csv, it's really just a straight up regular text file, but it's indicating that, okay, this is a text file that has a very specific format to it. You could technically have a tab separated file, a TSV for instance, or a semicolon separated file. These features are called delimiters, the ways that values are delimited from each other. So with that, guys, we're going to hop into what our syntax is for how to read in a file, and then go through some code that it's extending on that syntax to bring in that information and then process something out. So first, guys, as you see here, I only have one line of code that we're looking at the moment. The first thing you're seeing is that we're creating an object. It's called F. F is short for file. We have the assignment operator here, and when we're using this open function, and we pass in two parameters. First, the parameter we pass in is the path, where the actual file is in our directory. In this case, we're going to be using this thing called winequality-red.csv. When we go to the code section, I'm going to show you where to get this data. It's an open access data set about wine. We're going to, and then show you how to you just have to locate where this file is. If you go to section 11.2, I show you how to deal with pathing in Python, but essentially I'll go through it with you one step at a time and get that downloaded into a place that you need it to be downloaded for this pathing to work. Basically, all this is saying in the end is it's pointing to a very specific file somewhere in your system. The next thing you see here is this other parameter where it's just a string with one character in it. There are more than three, but the most common three letters that you can pass into the second parameter when you are opening a file are read, write, and append. What we're going to do in this section, obviously, is deal with a lot of reading. So what read does is it goes and looks for this file and tries to store it into memory. It tries to store it into this F object, all the information from that file. If we were to do W here instead of read, what this would end up doing is create a file to be written to. This would error if there was no file that existed in that directory. This read would fail. If there was no file that existed while we are writing, that won't fail because you're creating an object to write to. Consequently, when you use the write command, if a file already exists with this name, inequality-red.csv, you will delete the file. You'll destroy the old file and create a blank one. So you need to be very careful when you're using the write option. The next option is the append. Basically is kind of an in-between from the read and write function, where it doesn't destroy a file if it exists, but you can write to it. So basically it's like W, but it's for files that already exist. Okay, and I'll show you a couple of different ways to write out to that in our next section. But once we have read a file into memory like this, with this line here, what we can do is iterate over it, and we can do a for loop on that object to print every line in that object if it exists. And we'll show you what that looks like in our next section, especially once we go into the code. Okay, guys, so that's basically all the syntax that you need to know in order to read a file into memory, and it prints some aspect of it. When we go into our next section, or in the coding part, I'm going to show you how to process that data down so you can actually do meaningful for loops with it. Because at the moment when you create this object, it's not like a list of lists or something. It's not an array. It's not anything that you can do too much with at this point in time. So I'll give you a couple of tips and tricks, as well as use the with statement to show you how to do that. I didn't include the with statement in here because it's not really worthwhile of looking at syntax until we actually get into this. So let's just move into that now. Okay, everyone, welcome to the coding section of this lesson. So the first thing I want you guys to do is to go to this website here, www.dsi. So on and so forth. You're going to be looking at an open access data source that has some information about red and white wines. It's public access and for research only. Don't worry, basically what you're doing is research. You're training and learning how to use these tools for whatever your purposes are later on. The only point of their saying this is that you can't make money off of this data set, though I would be surprised if you could. If you could, then you don't need me for this course. So just download that zip file. You can use the red or white file, your choice. I ended up picking the red CSV file to show you how to do this read and write for both of these next two sections. The next thing I want to show you is that we've imported a new library called CSV. It just has a really nice read function that we're going to use to take our open object and parse it down and make it into something that we can use a for loop on really easily. And then I have NumPy here for the next section where we do like a little manipulation or do an array conversion. Show you how to process a raw file down into something that you can automate and build reasonable data analytics on. So we looked at these four lines already. The first thing we looked at was how to open one of these files. So what I've done is I've actually put this file where my Jupyter Notebook currently exists, so it doesn't have any pathing going on. If your file is like somewhere, if you're on a Macintosh computer and you've been filing or putting these all into the same place, like I've shown you in a couple of these classes, this default pathing would be something like from my home directory, that's what the tilde means, to my desktop directory, to its Udemy Python scripts to here. And if this works, yeah. Oh, it didn't find the file. No worries. Let's just remove that, and that should work just fine. Okay, so regardless, it's going to be something like in one of your default, wherever you decided to put this file, you have to make sure that the pathing is right there. It would be something similar for you. Make sure you do that. So I want to show you what this now looks like. We've created this object called f, which has opened up this wine data that we were looking at a second ago, and we'll see what that looks like. I've created just a simple for loop where we're going to try and print the first line of this object, see what happens, and break after the first line just to see what pops out. Okay, so what we get this, which is, if we look at the file itself, this is the headers. This is the top line of this data set. This is going to tell us that what each column represents when we start to break this data down into a CSV that we can analyze. You'll notice that they are separated by, they have double quotations for each column, and that each of them appear to be separated by a semicolon. This is our delimiter for this file. This means that if we wanted to do something like turn this into a list so that we could do nifty list operations on it, access, this variable volatile acidity and do a linear correlation of this to citric acid or something like that, and we could access those columns easily in Python or something. We want to almost do like a split, right? At the moment, this is just a string. And each string is separated by a line break. That's what, let's just print this all the way out and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so this is what the whole file looks like. We have the numbers here, and then each of them is separated by a line break. And our open object knows that when we do a for loop on something like this, that by default it should iterate across a line break. But for the moment, that's all we have, okay? So let's bring this all back. We print line. Let's just see this one line here. How do we actually take this data and do something meaningful with it? We want to actually access things, or get this into a form we can do some sort of analysis line by line, let's say. Well, if we were in Pandas, we could just load this as a data frame on its own, but let's say that this CSV file isn't super, you don't want to do that. You want to be going really, you don't want to have Pandas downloaded, or you want to be dealing with this at a much lower level. You can use this CSV package. It's a default package in Python, and the reader command. And what we do is the first parameter that you pass into csv.reader is the object, the file object. So at the moment, we already have an f here, but if this didn't exist, we could just as easily do something like this. File in, and then have this as f, like that. But at the moment, we've done it like this. And the other parameter that we've passed in is the delimiter, the thing that separates these elements from each other. So what this will do is end up creating almost like an array, a list of lists, an embedded list, and each element in that top level list is going to have another list, another array, and each of the elements is going to correspond to one of the columns in our CSV file. So what are some things that we can do with this CSV reader object? First off, one of the things that I found useful with a CSV reader object is that you can next line through the object by using this next function. So a lot of times you get CSV data comes in, you want to skip the header and just do some raw analysis. So headers are usually the first line, so you can skip a line right there. And then look what happens when we print this. Now we have a list with all of the values. They're strings at the moment, but that's okay. That correspond to each of the columns. Now we can do some iteration on it. Now we can why don't we pick the first these important rows, and then we can do some analysis. Great, super easy, and this is where we can start to manipulate our file and then write it to something else. Where we only want these things, and we want to calculate the year and the wine quality based on these variables, and we want you to pump that out as a CSV file. This is, you're almost on the way to do that. This is, the hardest part has now been done. The last thing I want to show you is the with statement. The with statement's nice in that it's really useful to use with CSV files. You basically, rather than storing the object, like explicitly saying, I'm going to open this file and like as an object and hold it as its own line, you can almost create a for statement or for loop as you're opening using with. So what you end up doing here is you use this with statement, you pass through the open function, and then you label it using as and give it a name. And now what you're going to be doing is every iteration of this with statement is going to go through one line at a time, this file object. So the first thing we do is we create we convert our data file into a CSV object, and then convert that entire CSV object into a list. So the CSV object is a CSV object with a bunch of arrays. Then we convert that whole thing into a list of lists, so we can then create a NumPy array to do some interesting analysis. Once this thing is a NumPy array, we can do like array calculations where we can actually start to go like data times 3. You can't do that with a list on its own. It doesn't work, but with an array you can. So what we've done here is I've just like selected everything but the first column, and then we can print, do like our print there, do our manipulations. Here is where we're going to eventually write to a file, and that's going to be our next class. So with that, guys, let's do a recap. So what did we learn today? We learned how to read a file into memory. We learned how to use the with statement to combine all that together and make like really tight code. We used the CSV reader package as a way to just take a text file without turning it into a pandas data frame and all that. Because you might not have pandas on the server that you're working on, or whatever reason, you just want to do like a quick iteration or something. And then we learned how to do some line by line manipulation of a data file that we can then write out to. So with that, guys, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the write out class, which is the next one.